Hey there, Jeff Lerner here. And in this video, I'm going to show you how ENTRE's life design process helps you achieve your dream life. Now, let me just say right up front, this is not a promotional video for ENTRE. This is a training video of how to use our anchor concept that we call the 4 Ps to really think about your life intentionally and ultimately change the trajectory of your life and make your hopes and dreams come true. This is the bedrock of the process that we use that we call life design. But again, this is not a sales pitch for ENTRE. This is a training video about how we do it. And frankly, you can apply these concepts to your life with or without our help. Although, I guess it goes without saying that we're experts at this stuff and it tends to go better with support from us or someone like us in any case. All right, so that said, let's dive in. I'm going to try to make this quick, but also thorough. So the first thing I want to say is kind of the foundation for this process and really for ENTRE's entire existence as a company, as a platform and as a product or service for you to potentially partake of, is that there basically are 2 paths, 2 possible life paths in this world. One I will call society's path, which is over on the left there. And well, first of all, let's start with that pyramid in the middle. You've probably seen that before. That is what's known as Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. So these are the things that human beings need in the order that we need them, meaning if we don't have the one below it, we don't unlock the need for the one above it. In other words, physiological is like air, water, food, which is to say if we don't have air, we're not really worried about anything else. We got to have air. That's the starting point. Next is safety, which would be like shelter or a basic ability to not get murdered every day or, safety. So again, once we have air, then the next thing we want is safety so that we can stay alive. And if we don't have that, we're not too worried about the things above it. But then once we have that, now it's like, I want to belong. I want to have love. I want to have connection. I want to feel integrated into society, right? And frankly, if we don't have that, if we're isolated or feel excessively lonely or ostracized, then we don't even get into really the feeling about how we feel about ourselves. Like man, first and foremost, is a social being before we're an egoic being, meaning a being in relationship to ourselves. But once we have that basic belonging and connection, we have, call it a place in society, then we get into self-esteem, our self-regard, our idea of self, development of that idea of self and how we feel about ourselves. And then ultimately from there, we get to what's called self-actualization, which is really bringing out all that was created within us and all that has been experienced by us to ultimately shape us and make us unique and actualize to actually become our full self on the outside, not just on the inside, right? That's the Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. And you really have to have all of that to be fulfilled. If the goal is to die without a bunch of regret, like death is the one game we know we're going to lose at some point. And it's not that we're going to never lose the game. It's that we're going to win the game before we lose the game. And the way you win the game is to be able to say, I had a life where I did what I was here to do. And I feel darn good about it, right? Take me now. People say like, I could die and I die a happy man, right? Because I've done what I came to do. That's the goal. And that's the principle that's broken down in this hierarchy of human needs. And the way society tells us to approach this, because so much is interlinked to money, right? To financial self-preservation and ostensibly some sort of wealth creation, although that's a fiction for most people. But basically, the life path, society's path for a human life maps pretty closely to Maslow's hierarchy. It says, okay, get a job. Like you're born, do what you're told, go to school, borrow money, do what you got to do, go to college, get a degree, get a job. Everything from basically the day we're born or maybe the day we start getting educated at 3 to 5 years old, all the way till we're 65 or 70 or 97 or whenever people are actually able to, pseudo retire these days. It's all organized around getting a job. Because that's not only how we tend to our physiological and safety needs, that's how we get our love and belonging. Like literally, if you're jobless and this is coming from somebody that's been jobless. I've been jobless on the poor end of the spectrum. I've also been jobless on the wealthy, I don't need to work end of the spectrum. You're very disconnected socially, and you have to work harder to find belonging and find ways to connect. But in any community, at any strata, at any level, you're always going to find people weaving together and finding ways to belong, because it's so important. But for most people, that's done through either our work or through communities that are still organized around socioeconomic or work type. Even neighborhoods are generally clustered around similar socioeconomic classes that have similar concerns and do similar types of work, even if it's not similar work. And then within our work, we get so much of our self-esteem, so much of our way that we feel respected in the world. And since we live in a world that has so much of an external orientation around self-regard, that basically we respect ourselves in large degree because we're respected by others. A lot of that still has to do with work, right? We picture a successful person in our mind, and most of us have a vision of a successful person, and it's typically either a successful person in our field who's financially successful or has an esteemed title or role within our category of work, or even if you're, let's say, a stay-at-home homemaker, or you tend to family, when you picture someone of success, that's still your type of work, and you're picturing somebody who embodies a level of respect and achievement at that type of work, right? Like whatever our job is, whether it's to actually go into the world and do a job, or it's to stay at home and support someone who does go out into the world and do a job by doing our job that supports their job, either way, it's all about get a job, right? And get promoted and do well at that job. And then we have this idea that once I've done all that for 65 or 70 or, like I said, 97 years, whenever I finally get to retire, now I get to self-actualize, right? I'll use my dad as an example. Dad, if you see this, hope you don't mind me using you as an example, but my dad had passions. He had passions for woodworking. He had passion for fly fishing. He had passion for types of art. My mom, too, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, had passion for philanthropic service, had passion to work with animals. They had these passions, and all of the things that were like they were most excited about and most passionate to get to do, they waited to do until they were retired. Now, fortunately, they were in the very small minority of people who are actually successful enough financially to be able to go indulge those passions, and they were able to retire younger than most. But the reality of the modern world now is that most people that are waiting to self-actualize and get involved in and do the things that they feel really, really align with their identity, they're not ever going to have enough money, and they're going to run out of time. I mean, that's just the economic reality of the world. If you go read my book, Unlock Your Potential, it breaks down in very stark terms the macroeconomic reality that we all inhabit, where this idea of like I'm waiting to retire so that I can fully be myself and do the things I really want to do, that's a shrinking window, right? We're living longer, but we're working even longer than we're living longer, right? And so society's path, Entre would argue, is bogus. It's a bad trade. And the thing is, we get hooked into it. We're invited to make the deal, so to speak, before we're old enough to know any better. We all sign up for this deal when we're 5 years old and we enroll in school. And then at that point, we're just indoctrinated that like, this is the deal. This is the trade. This is how it's done. And we're taught and we're reared by older generations where it still wasn't a great trade, but it was a better trade then than it is now. You know, you've got some 50-year-old teacher who actually is going to be able to retire in 15 years with a pension, telling some 8-year-old student who is, by the time they're that age, that whole system's going to be insolvent, and inflation is going to have completely destroyed the middle class. The Federal Reserve and the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the, collapse of the dollar as the world reserve currency, like these are all trends that are happening in the next, call it 10 to 30 years. And certainly with, AI and mechanization and automation and robotics are going to replace a lot of working class jobs and moving more towards an information and skills economy. Like, we're not teaching kids about what their life is actually going to look like. We're just telling them that there's this path based on what was true 50 years ago. And the reason Entre has blown up, the reason we've taken off like a freaking rocket ship in this world is because you've got your 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old grown working adults that are waking up to this reality and going, man, I signed up for a trade back in the day when I didn't know better, but I've been in this game long enough now to realize I don't think that trade was going to hold. I don't think they really gave me the deal that I was signing up for, right? Like I think I should have read the fine print on this trade. And that's why Entre's had, 280,000 students or whatever we've had in 4 years, because what it takes for a human life to be complete and fulfilled and without regret is what we are told we're going to get when we're young, when we play by society's rules and we follow society's path. But as we mature, we find out that is not the case. And that is why the Entre path appeals to people, which, look, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, get rich in 30 days or make $1 million in a year or whatever BS nonsense promises the internet, entrepreneurial training economy wants to be built around that is, predatory and, waste people's money and time. I'm going to sit here and say, hey, you got two choices in this world. You got society's path, which is, it's 40 plus years of work. It's 70 plus years of life only to realize that it was a bad deal. Or you got the Entre path, maybe 5-10 years. And obviously you can cover a lot of ground in the first 90 days. We have an accelerator phase that guarantees that you'll have your success vehicle or your business, we call it a success vehicle, but whatever the thing is, you'll have it up and running in 90 days and able to start working and generating income with, and whatever, depending on which of our programs you get into, like we deliver measurable specific results in relatively short windows of time. But if you say, hey, I'm going to live the Entre path, I'm going to transform my life in all areas, I'm going to get off society's hamster wheel, and I'm going to get onto a path where I can actually have a life that remotely resembles what I dreamed of as a child, and I can do that in 5 to 10 years instead of 50 of wasting my time, dang, I think I'm going to do that, especially when you can do them both at the same time. You don't have to get off society's path to start down the Entre path. It's just at a certain point, you're going to want to commit and hop all the way over, but you don't do that until you've been able to wean off the dependency on society's path. And understand, society's path is entirely based on that one word that I just shared, dependency. It starts in high school when attendance is literally compulsory. Your parents will get fined if you don't go to school because they are going to force you to be dependent on them for matriculation out into the workforce for that diploma. And then usually they say borrow money. Now you're financially dependent. It takes an average of 22 years to pay off student loans. And it's one of the only categories of debt that you cannot even declare bankruptcy to get out of. Now you're on the hook there. You're dependent. You go to college. They roll you into that 30-year mortgage of that home, that hyperinflated house that, look at the price of housing. And look, I'm a real estate investor. I, in many respects, love what's happened with housing prices. My net worth has gone up dramatically because of what's happened to the value of real estate. But ultimately, it's because it's all funded with fractional reserve lending and the way the banking system works, which for every $100 that gets loaned out for a mortgage, there's only $1 to $3 in actual savings that are anchoring that $100 in lending power. Because, well, whatever, I don't need to explain fractional reserve lending, but like when you have that level of liquidity and that artificially inflated money supply, that the easiest way to access it is for real estate purposes, getting dumped into that class of asset. Now real estate prices go through the roof and you're hooked into these 30-year, sometimes 40 or 50-year mortgages. I don't think they do 50s anymore. I remember when I started doing real estate investing, they did. But you're hooked into these mortgages. Now you're dependent on that. And by the way, you can't even get that mortgage in most cases unless you have W-2 income, because even though entrepreneurs make about double the average employee, entrepreneurs earn on average double what employees earn. Lenders want employees to borrow the money because they're more predictable borrowers and they know that they've got them on the hook. They're more likely to pay their mortgage because they're on the hook, and also they are less financially mobile. Right? So they're going to stay, like lenders want their loans to stay on their books performing over longer periods of time. That's why they prioritize giving them to employees over entrepreneurs. I make way more money than most employees, but I have to use my own commercial lines of credit to buy real estate because I don't have W-2 income that I can just walk into a bank and show, even though I make 10 times what the person who they're giving a mortgage to makes, because they have a W-2 as a middle manager for $85,000 a year or whatever. and they can prove their income, right? But that's all set up because they want this massive class of people that are dependent on those loans. Remember, the whole system is based on dependency. And then the financial system, the retirement piece of the equation, which retirement is the crux concept for the entire banking system. If we got rid of the concept of retirement, nobody would be putting these deposits, nobody would be pumping trillions of dollars into 401ks and pensions and all the where the money sits that is actually the bedrock of the entire financial system, that all the derivatives and exponential multiplication of lending power and investing power is all based on this bedrock of savings that is anchored to this concept of retirement. And we think that we're dependent on 40 or 50 years of work just to get to this finish line and open up this little sliver of time called retirement, right? Like, dependency is the bedrock of the whole thing. So I know I get on a soapbox about it, but it's like I walk around looking at the world, seeing what passes for normal before my eyes, going, we live in, just like, if you've ever thought, like, it is so flippin' ridiculous that we live in a world that grows enough food to feed everybody, and yet hundreds of millions of people are starving because we just won't sit down and figure out how to equitably distribute the food that's already being grown to get to the mouths that need to eat it. Like, it's such a ridiculous problem that we totally have the wherewithal to solve, and it frustrates you when you think about it. That's how I feel about the fact that we sell this bill of goods to the entire world called the socially ordained path to get to fulfillment or actualization or retirement or whatever we want to call it. And I know full well that it's a bogus trade that we've enrolled hundreds of millions of people into when they were children and they were too young to know better. It's like addicting the whole world to McDonald's French fries, and then 40 years later, we wonder why, 69% of Americans are either obese, like morbidly obese, or overweight. Well, because when they were 7, we got them hooked on McDonald's French fries, and we stopped feeding them real food. And in a very real sense, that's what we're doing for their entire life. And that's what ENTRE stands against, focused on our purpose. First of all, the idea that we're on this earth created to do something that matters. And we get there by living the ENTRE way life operating system supported by the 3 legs of ENTRE: knowledge, environment, and resources. Anyway, this is not, like I said, this is not a sales pitch for ENTRE, but we have intentionally constructed ENTRE to support people in this different way of living. So let's contrast what it looks like, the left side and the right side. What does the left path look like in practice based on real data for average people? And we call this life undesigned. Obviously, ENTRE is a life design platform. This is the undesigned life. Well, physically, and we talked about the 4 Ps: physical, personal, professional, and our sense of purpose. Physically, 49% are pre-diabetic or diabetic, 42% are obese, 88% show at least one sign of metabolic syndrome. I might have mentioned I'm on a cruise ship right now. If you want to see that in action, go hang out by the pool during the day. It's on full display. 60% of people have a chronic health condition. 66% of people take a prescription drug every single day just to function. And we spend 20%, it's over $4 trillion a year in this country, on healthcare. And we are the unhealthiest developed nation in the world. And it is completely ridiculous. It is as ridiculous as the food supply issue that in this country, we cannot figure out how to just physically not be sick all the time for the most part. Professionally, you have an average person working 40, 50 years, earning a 2.3% average annual raise against a 3.3% average long-term of inflation. If you don't know what that means, it means that every year you get 1% poorer. In other words, you might make a little more money than you did the year before, but all the stuff that you're buying got more expensive than it was the year before, and it got more expensive than your income got more. In other words, like if you made $1 last year and you spent $1 last year, well, this year you're going to make $1.02, but you're going to have to spend $1.03. And then it happens again the next year and the next year and the next year. And after 40 years in the workforce, that compounding difference of about 1% equates to a 49% loss of purchasing power over the course of a 40-year career. So when you're 65, working the typical job, getting a typical raise, you're actually you're 49% poorer. You're only half as affluent as you were at 25 when you were just entering the workforce. Meanwhile, we have guidance telling us that we need between $2 and $5 million in net worth to retire comfortably, which, by the way, is true. The world is expensive, and when you're 70 years old and you got your own healthcare stuff to deal with, and you're probably trying to help out your family a little bit, or at least maybe put some money away for your grandkids' college fund. And you also want to take a trip that, all the bucket list stuff that's, delayed gratification of retirement, that whole promise that was made to us. Like, you're not going to get by on, the average 65-year-old has $60,000 in savings. $60,000 in savings conservatively invested to return 5%. What, they're going to live on $3,000 a year? Doesn't even make sense, right? We need 2 to 5 million, and yet we were supposed to save that over the course of a career where we got 50% poorer over the 40 years that we worked. That's the professional promise that the world holds for people. Personally, it's not like we're equipping people with amazing personal, interpersonal relationship and communication skills so that at least they can be happy in that part of their life. The average marriage now only lasts 8 years. Less than 20% of people self-report as being very happy in the general social survey that's been conducted every year since 1972, while more than twice that many people every single day deal with anxiety or depression, which even that is still only 2/3 of the people that have to take a prescription drug for one reason or another every single day just to function. So personally, we're a mess. And then in terms of purpose, there's a lot I could say. You can look at the decay in values, you can look at the decay in faith, you can look at the decay in families, but ultimately this was the most powerful statistic I found that speaks to the despondency and the hopelessness that we feel in the modern world, where 81% of people deeply believe that life has a purpose. They just don't think it matters for them, because only 6% of people even think about theirs one time per year. Meaning, like this is, and I don't mean to be insensitive because I realize this is how the majority of people live, but it's bizarre to me to believe that life has a purpose, but not even one time per year actually sit down and think about my own and look at my life and make sure that it's in alignment with what I'm on this earth to do, right? Like, that's the ultimate pass-fail exam of life. We worry so much about studying for a test when we're in college, but there's only one pass-fail exam in this life that really, really ultimately matters, which is, did I do what I was here to do or not? Well, 81% of us believe that test will be given, and only 6% of people are even bothering to study for it, even one time per year. It's craziness, right? That's America. That's the life undesigned world that we live in. That is the left side of this. And, we get what we get. Like I tell my kids, we get what we get and we don't throw a fit. BS, I'm throwing a fit. We decided to do something about it. That's what ENTRE is. So here's how ENTRE works. Same four axes. Axes? I forget the plural of axis. We'll go with axes. Physical, professional, personal, and purpose. All right, so physical, it actually all starts with physical. That's why I get so worked up about being up at the pool on the cruise ship and looking around and like, my gosh, people have just abdicated their self-care to industrialized food supply that's draining minerals and nutrients out and serving them processed carbs for 3 to 12 square meals a day, and we wonder why we are who we are and how we are now. But the reason the physical matters so much, it's not about looking good. Like, this doesn't have a dang thing to do with vanity or having a six-pack or a chiseled jawline. I could care less. Trust me, if being good looking was a key to success in this life, I would not be where I am. It's about how we take care of ourselves and the respect that we show ourselves and the confidence that we breed by making and keeping important commitments to ourselves, proving to ourselves that we are the kind of person that will do what we tell ourselves that we're going to do, and that we value ourselves enough to do the things that matter to us, that matter for allowing us and empowering us to go out and live a life of impact and service. If you want to, just like they say, you can't help the poor by being one of them. You can't help the poor and the tired and the overworked and the overstressed and the drained and the struggling by being one of them. And the place that you start to not be one of them is how you take care of your body. And it's also how you start to build the mental muscle of discipline and a willingness to be that outlier person that'll actually go do the things that a life of greatness requires. And that's why we start with the physical. You start to create new habits. In the professional area of life, by no means do we say quit your day job. Remember, I said you can be on society's path and start working on the ENTRE path. But what that ENTRE path is going to look like is a learning that moves you toward the creation of what we call your success vehicle. And you see I've got the lock and the key here, because the success vehicle is what unlocks what we call the growth phase. And I don't want to get too bogged down in the 3 phases of legacy, which is another concept we teach. But you'll notice on the undesigned chart, the entire thing was called the income phase. In other words, we never graduated out of the income phase. Our entire life was defined by an effort to get more income, and by the fact that we never did. We never got sufficient surplus to be able to unlock the next phases of life. But when you create an effective success vehicle and achieve what we call your awesome life number, which is a level of income that we define a very specific way, it unlocks what we call the growth phase, at which point you're continuing to work in your success vehicle. And by the way, once you unlock that, that's when you could actually, let's say, quit your day job, right? Or you can kind of, at that point, you're free. You can get off society's path and fully commit to the entre path. And then you keep developing your success vehicle and other things that we teach and talk about. It doesn't look the same for every person. And ultimately, the goal is to convert your awesome life number from an active number to a passive number, at which point you unlock the wealth phase. And now you can focus full time on living out your purpose, whatever it is. And I'll use myself as an example. My purpose is disrupting the status quo, reforming the education system, and freeing people from the broken system, as I call it, and helping people understand these concepts. That is my purpose, and that is what I do 25 hours a day now, because I don't have to do all this other stuff that is what defines most people's lives. But that only happened because I created a success vehicle. In my case, I created multiple. I unlocked my income phase, achieved my awesome life number, converted it to passive, and now I don't have to worry anymore, right? And that's the path that we put people on, with this parallel learning path, and then this parallel path of developing a success vehicle that eventually allows you to hop off of your current vocation into that full time as you go through the growth phase. Meanwhile, there's the personal path, which is about relationships, communication, empathy, emotional regulation, all the really wonderful human stuff, the stuff that gives life such richness, but that they don't even talk about in school, much less teach effectively. And ultimately, a sense of purpose, right? And Entre has stuff that's built into our ecosystem to help people with personal development, relationship development, and eventually, ultimately, unlocking a true sense of purpose that, by the way, was always there. Your purpose, we use this concept at Entre called your success DNA, which is a combination of your natural gifts and your life experience. Your purpose was always there. It's been suggested to you your whole life through your life experience, combined with your natural gifts. And ultimately, there's a Japanese concept called ikigai that really puts this clear, which is ikigai is a convergence of 4 things. It's what are you good at? What does the world actually need or benefit from? What can you get paid to do? And what do you enjoy? And when you find the thing that is all 4 of those things, that is ikigai is the Japanese word for purpose. That is your purpose. And it's that one thing that you're on this earth to do. For me, it's about reclaiming human lives from the broken educational, employment, and retirement systems. That purpose has been there my whole life. And I could, I'm 44 now, I could do this for 100 more years and never regret a day that I wasn't, living my calling, but gosh, most people never even, it seems like, you look at the pyramid, that purpose, that's the self-actualization question. What am I here to do? And most people, they never even get to ask themselves that question. We saw it here. 81% of people believe it. 6% of people even think about it one time a year. Because why think about it when you're supposed to just be a good little foot soldier who goes to work and does their job every day just so you can work through these levels, and you're supposed to be saving all this to the end. But as we see in this graph, you never get out of the income phase. The end never comes. You retire poor, you die poor, and even if you retire middling, now, it depends how old you are. If you're 64 and a half and you're retiring in 6 months, good for you. Maybe you're going to have a decent retirement. If you're 34 and a half and you have, another 30, 40 years, if you're working that job, earning that 2.3% raise against a 3.3 long-term rate of inflation, which by the way, in the short term is double that right now, if you've seen the numbers, and by the way, not going to go back down. Inflation is 3.3 is the long-term rate. I think we're at, between 5 and 10% inflation. 20 years from now, they're going to look back and go, oh, remember the days when 3.3% was the long-term rate of inflation? Because of what's happening with the way the dollar functions in the world economy. Like, it's a bad deal. And this is the only, so I don't want to say that, like, I don't want to be too grandiose about what Entre is and our place in the world, but honestly, I think that we are the life raft out there in the world for hundreds of millions of people to have a chance at the life that they want, as opposed to a life that is based on letting go of dreams, accepting compromises, normalizing disappointments, and ultimately staving off a sense of futility longer and longer, which gets harder and harder because it gets heavier and heavier because it's more and more true the way the world is going. So that was a little bit of a gloomy ending there, but that's why we do what we do, and that's why we're so flippin' passionate about it, because we're literally trying to save lives. So if you want this and not this, because you want what's on the right here and not what's on the left here, at least now you understand what you're working with. Thanks for your time.